the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out.
Hello, Miami. Thank you so much for watching 305 Sports Now. I am your host, Will, and today's guest needs no introduction. He is the host of the very popular Canes podcast, Locked On Canes, and he is also the host of Locked On ACC as well, and an occasional host as well at here locally at 560 WQAM. Ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, the GOAT, Mr. Alex Donno. How's it going, sir?
Hey, Will, I'm doing all right, man. Thank you so much for having me back. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Thank you so much for coming on. I know you've been a little under the weather, so I appreciate you joining the show.
I'm just trying to get my voice back. I've been screaming too much. Welcome to the U, and now I'm struggling to get out.
Yeah, well, it happens. I mean, it happens, and stuff like that. It happens. It's like the worst times when we're on vacation as well, so it can be kind of interesting trying to recover from it. I have a little something myself, as well, but I'm trying to push through it because, I'll be taking my kid on vacation later on today. So,
Awesome.
Yeah. You got to work around these things, as dads. But anyways, so I mean, you are the man when it comes to Canes content creation, and I have to say, you also have a firsthand look at practice, even though you're only allowed in there for like a cup of coffee, pretty much in Canes practice, inside of facilities over at Green Tree. I do want to go over a couple of positions and see, who you feel has stood out, in terms of whom you've seen in practice. And so I'm going to go position by position, first going over the offense, then going over the defense, and we'll do a little bit of recruitment. You ready, sir?
Sure.
All right, awesome. So starting first with wide receivers and tight ends, who to you has stood out at the wide receiver position and at the tight end position?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have seen by now the video of true freshman receiver Josh Moore hauling in this ridiculous one-handed grab that happened on Saturday, and it had everybody in the facility talking. He's someone I'm not, I didn't necessarily bring him up first to say he's going to be a starter or something. I don't expect him to be, but that's not impossible. But I wanted to bring up Moore because he's doing very well, the true freshman, and he's 6'4", 215 plus pounds. So he's already got that physical maturity. The one who's really been the man so far in the receiving core has been JoJo Trader, who I think is going to be someone who's going to step up and maybe be the number one or maybe number two receiver on this team. The other guy who I would look at as potentially being a top dog is CJ Daniels. We haven't really seen him practice much yet because he's coming off of an injury. But I'm very encouraged about CJ Daniels, a fifth year, or actually maybe even a 6-year senior who transferred over from LSU because he has been described by teammates, including Nye Carr, as being someone who's an absolute leader in that receiver room. Like the receivers meet with CJ Daniels right before they meet with Kevin Beard, their position coach. So that's just sort of the personality and the leadership that he has. So, hopefully once we actually see Daniels playing, and, he's pretty good at LSU last year, really good at Liberty before he transferred to LSU. That's someone I'm excited for. Malachi Toney, another young guy who's been one of the stories of practice so far. He's a really speedy, versatile slot receiver. I think he's really kind of pushing Ray Joseph, who's also practicing well. I don't want to take anything away from Ray as he's kind of looking to break out. And I've seen some good stuff from Dalen Upshaw, another freshman. And it's a really young receivers room. I mean, JoJo Trader heading into his second year is like the most experienced guy in that room until CJ Daniels starts practicing. So there's some youth there, but I think there's some promising talent at receiver. In terms of tight end, I mean, you're not going to be too surprised to hear that Elijah Lofton he's looked like the man so far. Excuse me. Elijah Lofton has looked like somebody who's going to have that breakout year. He's going to get a lot more reps. You can take a lot of those reps that Elijah Arroyo had last year as he's headed to the NFL. I've liked what I've seen from the true freshmen, Brock Schott and Luka Gilbert. I think Schott, especially when it comes to like the receiving standpoint, looks like somebody who I think can contribute right away. Miami also has a couple of transfers. Alex Bauman, who we've seen a little bit, who's got a lot of experience, good receiver in the red zone. Jack Nickel, who's actually the older brother of Luke Nickel. I think he's probably more of a blocker than a receiver, but he's getting some burn. You may have heard by now that apparently Jackson Carver unfortunately suffered an injury that might, keep him out for most of the season. So that's going to be a little hit to Miami's depth. Carver, he hasn't played much, but he's heading into his third year. So I want to wish him a speedy recovery, and I hope he, fully comes back and everything. But I think Elijah Lofton is going to be the guy who headlines that tight end room, and he may end up being Miami's leading receiver, right? Regardless of wide receivers, tight ends, Elijah Lofton to me is someone I'm going to look at as being an alpha.
The thing about Luca is he playing tight end? Because rumor has it he was gonna be moved to tackle eventually. Are you seeing that in practice, or is he running with the tight ends more often?
Yeah, I think he's still running with the tight ends for now. I think in terms of like if he ever makes the switch to tackle, if you recall, you probably do, for the old school people, you remember a guy like Eric Winston,
Yeah, Eric Swin.
from 15, 20 years ago, who came to Miami as a tight end, but ended up moving to, because he's so big, ended up moving to offensive tackle and being one of the better ones that Miami ever had. Like that might be something that's in Gilbert's future, but we'll see how far down the road that is for him.
Awesome. All right, now looking now at the running back position, I still assume it's the Mark Fletcher show, but anybody else standing out to you?
Jordan Lyle. I mean, it's hard. Fletcher and Lyle both look fantastic. I mean, it's hard to, I think on any given day, you could say, oh, Fletcher looks like he's the man right now, or Lyle looks like he's the man right now. I think it's going to be a pretty powerful rotation for them. I don't think it matters so much which one of them starts the game. Probably see some of the riding of the hot hand, and they're both going to get a lot of reps. The running back room doesn't have a whole lot of bodies right now. They only have 4 scholarship running backs, but the other 2 are also looking pretty good. Hellcat, Chris Wheatley Humphrey, he's put on a little bit of weight, which was important because he was a little smaller last year as a true freshman. And yeah, there's been times when Gerard Pringle, who's a true freshman now, an early enrollee, where you can kind of see that, hey, this is a complete back, really powerful for a young guy. I could see him ending up being a guy who plays maybe quite a bit this year, but Lyle and Fletcher, those are the guys who are at the top right now.
So Pringle's looking really good in practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Pringle looks really good. And I've seen the development. Like I remember watching him kind of the first day, where he's the only freshman in the running back room right now. So he's, was kind of learning sort of the practice habits and getting some extra instructions. And then maybe took one practice before he looked like he was, sophomore, like fully on with the routine.
That's awesome. Well, you can't have a solid running back room without talking about the offensive line. So I want to go over the offensive line of what you've seen. And I also want to talk about Pancake Honcho, Samson Okunola, because there's been talk about him that he hasn't gotten to the field much. Since I know he had an injury. He was dealing with injury, but how has he looked in practice? And could this be a breakout year for him?
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, it's more difficult from like where we watch practice from, especially since pads had not come on yet until literally today. So I'm not going to claim to be an expert on like who the second and third I have a good idea who the starters are probably going to be, but in terms of like the full offensive line depth chart, it's a little hard to grasp at this time of year. But Mario Cristobal has described Samson Okunlola, I believe Alex Mirabal did as well, somebody who's been practicing well and competing. There have been times, last year, and you mentioned he has battled through some injuries where he's been like really close to, being a starter or a top 2 guy. There's been a lot of competition the last couple of years at that left guard spot. I'll tell you who's doing really well again and is worth mentioning is Ryan Rodriguez. People maybe forgot about him a little bit because he actually won the starting job at left guard last year, which surprised some people because a lot of people thought it was like a Matthew McCoy versus Samson Okunlola. And McCoy is also doing really well, by the way. But Ryan Rodriguez actually ended up being the day 1 starter against Florida there, but then got injured, didn't play again last year. He's worked through that injury and he's been practicing tremendously well. So, the interior, there's a lot of competition, outside of, right guard, of course, where Inez Cooper has it held down. There's a lot of competition at left guard, and there's a lot of competition for rotational spots. So Ryan Rodriguez is doing super well. Matthew McCoy is right there. I'm hoping Okunlola can be right there as well. Markel Bell has the left tackle job pretty much locked up. I mean, he progressed so much last year from start to finish when he, ended up having to start like, close to, I'd say about a third of the season in place of Jalen Rivers. And then he kept playing even, when Rivers came back from injury, he was starting in some cases. James Brockermeyer, who's the new starting center, hasn't skipped a beat. I mean, Miami's done really well the last 3 years picking up these, 1 year starting centers. Brockermeyer looks like another good one. And then, in terms of the right side of Miami's offensive line, I feel as good about that as I feel about any group in the country, with an Ez Cooper at right guard and CeCe Maui Noah at right tackle. Someone else who, I would probably project my starters to be, of course, Bell at left tackle, either Rodriguez or McCoy at left guard, Brockermeyer for sure at center, Cooper for sure at right guard, CeCe for sure at right tackle. I talked about some of the other competitors and rotational guys. Tommy Kinsler, I think, is also doing pretty well when it comes to competing for playing time. But the offensive line, that group, you mentioned it. They're going to be one of the better groups in the country, I think, and I hope.
Yeah, I totally expect Carson Beck to not have the issues this year that he had at Georgia last year. I think he's gonna have a very clean pocket, similar to what Cam Ward enjoyed. So now going to the quarterback position as a segue. We know Carson's injured. How do those mental reps work? I mean, we've seen some highlights online with Carson, looking to see where he would throw it to his receivers. What's it like? What's it like looking at it in person, and how does it work, and the practicality of it?
Yeah, I mean, he's been out there. He's been, taking some snaps and kind of going. It's a little interesting to watch. Obviously understanding his situation. His UCL in his right elbow is recovering from surgery, and they're being very careful with him. I think his recovery is going fine, but like he's kind of going through reps, just not actually throwing the football. And so, a lot of else what he's doing, aside from like being out there going through some drills that don't involve throwing, he's obviously watching his teammates, the other quarterbacks, hopefully giving tips to them. I know he's gotten pretty close with the quarterback room and kind of watching the receivers, going through film studies and stuff. So, it's definitely a disadvantage, like until he can actually be cleared to throw and go through the full version of these reps. It's not the most ideal situation to be in, but he is practicing, and Beck is doing, I think, all he can to stay engaged. And then as soon as he gets that green light to throw, there's no substitute for actually building that timing with your receivers. So I'm sure that once he gets that green light, he's going to be doing some, extra workouts kind of after practice with his players.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So now I want to speak about another quarterback. Big fan of this young man. I'm looking forward to the day the keys are given to him to run the offense. That's Luke Nickel. How has he looked in practice? I was a huge fan of his, watching his recruitment, watching his huddle video when he was coming out of Milton High School. So how's he looking in practice so far?
Yeah, I would say ups and downs, some
Okay.
really good and some typical freshman stuff, which is it reminds me a little bit of and hopefully that it plays out the same way, because I was watching Judd Anderson this time last year, and he really looked more confident throughout spring into fall camp. So you would expect the same sort of strides from Nickel, but I've seen him make some good throws. It's not one of those things where if anybody thought you could just kind of microwave this guy and get him ready to be, maybe he could start this year. Like there's going to be true freshman growing pains, especially when you're talking about the first, 2.5 weeks of spring football. But you definitely see some signs and some flashes from Luke. And this is someone I know has the work ethic and the desire to continue to develop. And like you, I think he could be a future starting quarterback at Miami. But in the meantime, you're going to see some ups and downs, some freshman sort of growing pains.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Transition now to the defense. Okay. I want to go over the defensive line a little bit and the linebackers. Starting first with the linebackers, I heard that Wesley Bassane looks like he has a different body than he did last year, that he's totally transformed himself. How has he looked in practice, and how much has he grown physically to pretty much possibly a Mike linebacker this year?
Yeah, he's done well. I mean, what Wesley practiced well already the last couple of years, probably has brought it into an even different level, because you mentioned, he's more muscular and more chiseled. I can't remember exactly how much weight he said he put on, but he did tell us that he put on some muscular weight when we spoke to him a couple weeks back. And he's, for all intents and purposes, I think he's the leader of that linebacker room and one of the leaders of the defense. I know being like a vocal leader is an important thing for him. And yeah, it seems like he's cross training more than ever. Like I don't know. I can't say for sure if he's going to end up being like a starting Mike linebacker. He's primarily been a weak side linebacker at his time in Miami. I don't know for sure if a full-time position change is going to happen for him. I don't know if he knows for sure whether that's going to happen or not, but I know he's been cross training a lot more, Will. And I think part of that comes with the territory of, new defensive coordinator who's also your new linebackers coach, Corey Heatherman. He wanted to create a little bit of a blank slate, getting to know his personnel for the first time, because sometimes you'll realize there may be certain players that you thought were cornerbacks who can play safety. There may be guys who you thought were Mike linebackers who are really better suited to be Will linebackers, or vice versa. And I think Wes is getting that opportunity. So, if he ends up full time, kind of moving to a slightly different spot, I think we'll find out once we get closer to the season. But he's definitely he's doing well, and it's his final year. Like, time flies. I think he's heading into his fourth year now, Bassane. So he's got to be the anchor of that linebacker room.
Oh, I remember about 4 years. I remember when he was recruited, and he was
Same.
a small guy coming out of Northwestern. I mean, it was incredible. Um, That's now, but the other linebacker crew like Popo and also Cam Bobby Pruitt, really excited about this season and seeing how they develop as well. How have they looked in practice? Any changes you've seen to their game? With a new defensive coordinator / new linebacker coach as well.
Yeah, I think some of the same things that I said about Basaint also apply to Popo. He's a little younger, but he's also he's a dog, like a lot of leadership. He's very vocal. He usually flashes pretty well in practice. And then Bobby Pruitt, he's one of my favorite guys to watch, because he's always, even on days when the contact is limited and there's no pads on, he always finds a way to look more physical than most of the rest of the defenders. Like, he just Pruitt always gets after it, and he flies around the field. I enjoy watching his quickness and his range. Like, I think we saw some of the plays he made on special teams last year, how quickly he can get upfield and be disruptive. And I think we'll probably see more of that at linebacker this year. So he's been enjoyable to watch for sure. I think the three names we talked about definitely seem to be kind of the top three. I'm looking forward to seeing more from Adarius Hayes, who's really big and powerful. And in Miami also, they have Jalen Alderman and Chase Smith back, who are a couple more elder statesmen in the linebacker room. Smith is probably a guy I don't talk about enough, because he always practices well and makes plays. So, the linebacker room, I think maybe a lot of people wonder if they're going to try to add, because it's not the deepest in the world, if they'll maybe try to add somebody else in the transfer portal. But what they do have in the room has looked pretty quality so far.
Yeah, Aldarius Hayes looked like he was NFL ready when he first walked into Miami. I remember, especially since it was a battle between Miami and Florida, and Miami ended up flipping him as well. So so he's in practice. He's stood out a bit as far as physicality goes, or as far as what intangibles has he shown you in practice.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that. He's really big, and he moves very well, Hayes. And so I think it's only a matter of time for him before, I'd like to see what role he plays in the rotation this year. If he's one of the first guys kind of off the bench. Miami, we'll see how Heatherman does it, but Miami, rotates linebackers from time to time. So to me, he looks like somebody who can play and contribute. Like, he's a guy. Like, he's a dude. He's a former high 4-star level recruit, and I think he's going to be a good one here.
Perfect. Now transitioning over to defensive line, it's interesting because it's at the end position. It's Ruben Bain and Mesidor, but I feel like Mesidor's side of the field is going to get a lot of rotation, as far as because there's a lot of talent. I mean, that's one thing Miami's not lacking is defensive ends. I want to go over the young guys a little bit, because there's a lot of conversation about Scroggins and Hayden Lowe and Booker Pickett. How have they looked? Are they ready? Is Booker ready to take that next step? And is Hayden Lowe going to be a contributor right off the bat when 2025 starts?
Yeah, I think Pickett's been getting a little bit bigger. And this is one of those things where you watched him in high school, some of the high school all-star games. I mean, he's just got a nose to make plays. So I think Pickett is going to be someone who can take a step up. Scroggins has looked good at times already, and I know he was really also impressive in the offseason workouts before spring football even started. The guy who gets everyone's attention because he just looks like a beast out there is Hayden Lowe. I mean, Lowe, he's already 250 plus, as a guy who, should still be in high school. He should be getting ready for his prom in a couple of weeks. He's already out there looking like a junior. So, I think in a lot of the same ways that, Ruben Bain burst on the scene as a true freshman a couple years ago and got a lot of playing time. I could see Lowe having that sort of impact, getting on the field a lot. I mean, he looks like a guy who absolutely gets it, and he's really responding well to Jason Taylor's coaching. And Bain is also practicing really well. I know he probably has a chip on his shoulder after his season getting affected very much by injury last year. I think a lot of fans have been unfairly saying he took a step back when really, to me, he missed half a season and wasn't healthy. I think that had more to do with it than anything. And Akeem Mesidor, this is a guy, like, I just think Miami's really lucky to have him back another year. He so many times over the years will get players who will kind of make that questionable decision to leave early, right? Where Mesidor, he could have left. He'd probably be drafted in the NFL this year, but he decided to really maximize, his one final season in college. So he decided to come back this year. I think it's a blessing that he did because, Mesidor, he didn't have the full off season last year because he was recovering from those foot issues, but he's completely healthy now, off season, spring football. So I think the table is set for Mesidor to maybe lead the team in sacks and have a monster year this year.
Yeah, he was very productive from the beginning when he first got here, except for that one year where we did suffer through injury, but he's been pretty
Yeah.
productive. So I do expect him to have a big year, especially now that he knows he's playing the end, pretty much full time versus being moved inside and moved outside every so often. Speaking of the interior, okay, David Blay, Artavis Jones, Justin Scott, Ahmad Moen. One of the complaints, though, that Canes fans had at the end of the season was the lack of physicality, especially towards the end of the season from the interior. That's something that defensive coordinator Heatherman has really expressed that we're going to go back to as far as Canes football goes. What have you seen in practice that give an idea that this could be a much more different, much more aggressive team coming out of the interior this upcoming season?
Yeah, I mean, there in terms of like what we actually see, in terms of like scrimmage situations, 11 on 11, it's pretty close to the vest. The media doesn't get to watch a lot of that, but talking to some of these defensive guys, having talked with, I know Mesidor is an outside guy on the defensive line, but what Mesidor had to say about the defensive line approach, what David Blay, who we spoke to last week, had to say about it, I think they really appreciate the more simplified, direct approach to getting into the backfield. So I think that's something we're going to see translate on Saturdays this year. And as far as individuals go, Justin Scott, I think he's going to be a dude this year. And the pads just come on today, full pads for the first time. I'm hearing good feedback about the way Justin Scott is looking out there. Not at practice today because I'm trying not to infect the entire facility. but I'm hearing good feedback about Justin Scott with the pads having come on. And someone who has stood out to me when I've been out there is Armando Blunt. I think he's been really looking good out there. David Blay as well is one who I think he generated a lot of sacks from the interior at Louisiana Tech. Hopefully he could do that at Miami. Artavius Jones is definitely built like a guy who's going to bash some skulls this year. So hopefully we see him kind of polish out his game and that translate onto the field. So yeah, I mean, I think Miami is in pretty good shape at defensive tackle. I think this is another position where they might want to look to add one more experienced guy in the portal. But between David Blay and some of the younger guys, I think they're in pretty good shape there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think we're gonna see a different team this year. There's a lot of talent and athleticism within the interior. I don't see why. I mean, for goodness sakes, Artavis Jones, they used him at tight end at times when he was in high school. So
Yeah,
it
he's
just shows you the. I mean, you had a D tackle catching screen passes in high school. So there's no lack of
yeah.
athleticism on that interior. I do think that they were. It was just a scheme. I think that kind of threw them off a bit. But I expect a lot this year from that position. Two positions I do expect a lot from, especially because of portal depth and recruitment are safeties and cornerbacks. I've seen on whatever they've let us see through social media. I've seen the safeties look really good as far as movement, twitching, and basically physicality goes. And I've heard a lot of good things about the cornerbacks. Okay, but starting first with the safeties, we've done a lot in recruiting safeties, and we've done a lot to bring in safeties as well. What have you seen on the field these last couple of practices that was maybe missing last year from that position?
Well, I think what we're gonna a lot of what we're going to see is what it's hard to really grasp before the pads fully come on, which just happened today. Zaquan Patterson is someone I really expect to thrive with that increased physicality heading into his second year. And Zechariah Poyser, he looks like another dude. I mean, that's the other one who's been kind of the talk of practice so far on the defensive side, the transfer safety from Jacksonville State. He's been doing a really good job. He's gotten my attention. He's gotten the attention of his coaches. Markeith Williams has been practicing pretty well so far. So hopefully that could be a sign of him maybe turning a corner because he hasn't been all that consistent for the past couple of years. So yeah, in terms of the safety play, I want to. I think the biggest thing for those guys where they failed a lot last year was communication. Yeah, I know that's something that they're really emphasizing and working on this year. They've got Will Harris, new safeties coach, one of Miami's new defensive backs coach, who's focusing on that group. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think the addition of Zach Poyser is going to go a long way. But with if that unit can communicate more, and we don't see some of the lapsed and busted coverages we saw last year, you know, uh, I hope that unit can go from what was for a lot of the season last year a weakness. I think they can turn it into a strength.
Yeah, I think they've addressed that position very well in the offseason.
Yeah,
Again, both in the portal and recruitment. So I do expect you can only go up from here. you know,
yeah.
that's how that's how bad it was last year. And I like Poiser. He was highly rated coming into the portal. He was the second best safety in the portal. And also the fact he grew up a Canes fan, I think that says a lot because he really wants to be here. NIL was not much of a factor with him as far as bringing him over. I think he wanted to be here, and I think it's very important when you have guys that are completely bought into the legacy as well, and the coaching staff as well. Cornerbacks is a position that I love, especially when you have some good lockdowns as well. I think the acquisition of Xavier Lucas is going to really help Miami. On the other side with OJ Frederic, what can you tell me from what you've seen about the cornerback position? And is there a little bit more of a chip in that position this offseason in practice that you've seen that you could be like, oh wow, okay, this is definitely improvement from what we saw last year?
Xavier Lucas looks to me like he's a guy who could very well start here. The transfer from Wisconsin. Grew up in South Florida. I think Xavier Lucas is a guy who 200 plus pounds, physical, but he's also got the quickness to play that position. I know some have wondered, like, could he be a safety? I think for now we focus on him as a corner. OJ Frederic, of course, is going to try to build on, he was one of the bright spots of the secondary last year. He's heading into his second year. Damari Brown is a guy he's getting healthy again. His season was almost entirely robbed by injury last year. So you talk about the chip on the shoulder. I think that's probably a guy who really has a chip on his shoulder to come in and having a healthy year. And, I like what I see from the couple of freshmen who have been working with that group as well, whether it be, and some of these guys are cross training. Like I've seen Chris Ewald, who's, maybe a corner, but maybe a safety. I've seen him kind of working with both of those position groups, Amari Wallace, and, Charles Brantley, who I think is going to end up being probably potentially a starting nickel here from Michigan State. He's a guy who's made some plays in practice. And so, yeah, I mean, you talk about Mario addressing areas. I mean, cornerback and safety, the entire defensive backfield was a weakness last year. And Mario went out there and he got a ton of guys, a ton of quality players in the portal and in recruiting. And so I think the defensive backfield, there's no excuse why that unit shouldn't be fixed, right? You have new coaching there, with Etheridge and Harris, and new defensive philosophy with Heatherman, a bunch of new bodies there. And so it's been one of the pleasant things to watch in practice, that it looks like the defensive backfield is transformed.
Yeah, I was asked by a listener about Ryan Mack. I've heard really, really good things about him. I know he was hurt last year.
Yeah.
Anything about him that you know about, or
Yeah, I think he's still been recovering from some
okay,
stuff as well. But I think Ryan Mack is another one that, when he's been able to practice last year and this year, has always been turning heads. And so I think Mack is someone who can probably catch up to what OJ Frederic did last year. Their former high school teammates as well from St. Thomas Aquinas. And I think Mack is another one that can be a dude in that room.
thank you so much, Mr. Donno, on going position by position. Hope your voice is okay.
And I think we're holding in. We're hanging on.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so I want to go over recruiting a little bit. All right, a very, very popular cornerback out of Northwestern has announced that he is going to announce his commitment on March 31st. Javari Flowers. How is Miami looking as far as possibly landing the stud corner out of Northwestern High?
I think it's very much a toss-up, as we're a few days away from his announcement. And that's kind of and this is, of course, my perception. It's been a little bit more of like a negative trend, considering,
Okay.
he reclassified just within the last couple of months from 2027 to 2026. I think before he reclassified, Miami seemed like the actual firm leader in the clubhouse. But I think the change of timeline, the change of situation, it really reopened his recruitment, and a lot of the schools that were maybe kind of slow playing Javari Flowers started, whatever the opposite of slow playing is, they started to really put all their chips on the table. And so I think a few days away from his announcement, I could almost say it's like a toss up between Miami, Florida, who we hear a lot about with him, Auburn, we hear a lot about with him, and some folks think Notre Dame might be in it as well. They were kind of late to get into the Javari Flowers sweepstakes. It does sound like he had a really good visit with Miami. His official visit was, I think Monday through Wednesday this week. And it seems like Miami has made a strong case. Obviously, Miami, being he's from Northwestern, just 12 miles away from Miami's campus. Obviously, that's the program he's most familiar with. And so I think he knows exactly what he can get out of becoming a Hurricane. And I think it's one of those things where, Will, a couple days away from his announcement, I don't have a strong feeling on where he's headed. It could be Miami, could be Florida, could be Auburn. So maybe like once we get a little closer to his, I think March 31st, he's gonna put it out there. Maybe we'll hear some leaks like night before or day of. But as of right now, I've just got my fingers crossed that I hope it's Miami, because this is a player who, I know Miami has added a lot to their defensive backfield already, as we talked about, but he can be another strong body in that room, and a guy who could probably play right away on special teams. Because to me, Javari Flowers could come right in, be maybe the most dynamic punt returner or kick returner you have in year one. So wherever he ends up, that's something that school's going to get from him.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's a dynamic player, and he's a local player as well. You really don't want those players to get away. I do think the situation, the fact that we pumped up so many players at his position as far as cornerback and defensive backfield goes, may have swayed Miami a little bit out of the running. But I hope Miami can pull it off, because you can never have too many defensive backs, especially since last season they were dropping like flies. It felt like on several occasions, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, you never know. This is a young man I want to speak about next, that I was hearing D Money and Peter Reeves do a great job at Kane's Insight, because when it goes about recruitment is Hezi Kent. I hope I said his name right. Hezi Kent. He is an offensive lineman, 6'5", 300 pounds. But if you guys have not seen his huddle video, you have got to check this young man out. Miami's recruiting him not as an OT, but as a tight end. Okay,
Yeah.
He is 300 pounds, and if you watch him run, I can guarantee you he'll clock at a 4.6, 4.7. Very difficult to tackle. All right. So, Alex, what have you heard about his recruitment? I know he's not bomb balled, crystal balled, whatever bomb to go anywhere right now. But what have you heard about his recruitment, and how serious is Miami pursuing him, or how serious he's about Miami? But let me tell you, I was impressed when I saw the highlights.
He's a unicorn. To have a guy who weighs that much, who can run like a gazelle the way that he does, it's whether you play him at offensive tackle, tight end, or a little bit of both, I mean, what a weapon, whether he's
Yeah.
blocking downfield or catching bombs 30 yards down the field. As you would imagine, he's wanted, a Georgia prospect, wanted by a lot of different schools. I know Alabama wants to be in it for him, Texas, Florida, Miami, Florida State. I'm sure that there's a lot of others who have his ear. And if I'm not wrong, I think he's visiting this weekend for the pool party, I think, at Miami. It was either this weekend he's coming or he was here over the weekend. So I know Miami's got his attention, and they're at least getting him on campus, which is big. And this one might come down to, does he prefer to play offensive tackle or tight end? And I think sometimes when you have a player that's that talented, I'll say the same thing about Derek Cooper, who's like, if he can play multiple positions, maybe you let him decide. Or if he wants to play two positions two ways, you let him do it. I think the same way for and I don't know how to say his first name either. I've heard Heze, I've heard Hezea, which I'm not really sure if there's enough letters to come up with that. I've heard it said numerous different ways, but let's call him Superman, because that's his nickname, Superman Kent. So if Superman wants to play tight end, I think you let him play tight end. He wants to play offensive tackle, you let him play offensive tackle. I think he's that rare of a recruit with what a unicorn he is, being that big and that fast.
Yeah, I think unicorn is the right word and the right name for him, because if you look at him, he's probably going to stay in line the whole time because of his size, first of all, and then number two, you don't know if he's going to block or he's going to go out and as a receiver. So it's very difficult. He'll be a nightmare for defensive coordinators, because you don't know in any circumstance he's going to block. He's going to be a blocking tight end, or he's going to go out there and receive passes. So I do. Like I said, when I saw D Money talk about him, I saw the highlights and I saw it firsthand. I was like, oh my God, Miami could land this guy. I mean, talk about a security blanket and a monster could break tackles. I mean, you have a 300-pound tight end and you're a 220-pound defensive back. Are you really gonna want to tackle this guy? It's a business decision that you're gonna have to make with that dude. It kind of reminds me of when Donno Washington was carrying that poor Oregon defensive back for like 10 yards in the opening game of the season a couple of years ago. I mean, that kid became a meme, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure.
In general. Alex, it's always a pleasure talking to you. It's always a good time. Thank you so much. I know you've been a little bit under the weather. Thank you so much for joining us here at 305 Sports Now. Mr. Donno, where can we find you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. You can find all my content at Locked On Canes. Find us there on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. You can also follow me on X at Locked On Canes. We do most of our show-related tweets and our Miami-related tweets from there. So Locked On Canes is the spot to go. And Will, you have an awesome show, man. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't see Locked On Canes a couple days ago, Alex Donno is celebrating his third year as host of Locked On Canes. So congratulations, Alex. I am also an everydayer as well. And I could honestly speak, I think for the rest of us, that you definitely are the go of Canes content. I really appreciate all you do. I guess, like I said it before, when I first had you on, I've been listening to you for years when you're in your QAM days. So I'm very happy that you've been able to become a friend of our show. As well, I'm very happy that you are the number one Canes content creator out there as well, and all your success in Locked On Canes. So congratulations on 3 wonderful years, and may it be many, 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 many more.
Well, thank you, and I want to say thanks, to the Locked On Network. Like they've been so great to work with in terms of just the tools that they help me with, the tips, the coaching, the resources to help me succeed. It's just an awesome team to be a part of. And Will, thank you for shouting me out. So I wanted to shout them out after my shout out.
Awesome. All right, ladies and gentlemen, remember Locked On Canes, man, available all the time. he's like he's on every 2 hours. So you find wonderful Canes content. There's no one in this business that works harder than Alex Donno. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like the show, all right, if you like what you heard, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to 305 Sports Now. I will have the tag link for Locked On Canes at the bottom of this episode once it airs, so you can go directly to Locked On Canes. If you have not subscribed yet, subscribe, guys. Guys, have a wonderful day. God bless. Go Canes, guys. All about the U.